Hello everyone and welcome to my ASMR channel. This is a completely stress-free zone in which you have to relax and leave your worries behind. You can be yourself totally in here. This is a judgment-free zone also, and I just want you to feel safe, get relaxed, and just listen to my podcasts. See you later. If I were drowning, I couldn't reach out a hand to save myself. So unwilling am I to set myself up against fate. This is what she said to him one night. He wasn't interested, and she hadn't expected him to be so. She hadn't even thought, as she said it, that it might be the truth, but the image, nevertheless, remained with her, as though she had by accident articulated something of significance. And as she lay in bed at night, swollen and sleepless, she wondered whether it might not have been, after all, as she had said, because it wasn't so much the dignity as she feared, not screams, not the cause for attention, the inconvenience caused, the ugly respiration, the spluttering, the bubbling lungs. It wasn't so much these, though who would like the thought of them? It was worse than that, some yet greater pride or subjection. For if alone, even if alone, quietly going under, submerging, she would reject the opportune branch and fail to make for the friendly bank. Unless cast up there by the water itself, she would drown. There was something sacred in her fate that she dared not countermand by effort. If the current chose to rescue her, it could. Providence could deal with her without her own assistance. If she was chosen, she was chosen. If not, then she would quietly refrain from the folly of asserting her belief in her election. In the miraculous interventions of fate on her behalf. Some weeks later he left her. She wasn't surprised. She had been expecting it. She was quite pleased to see him go. Everything seemed a little colder without him. The bed, the house itself, her meals, which she could no longer trouble to heat. She ate baked beans and sardines and asparagus straight from the tin. The temperature of her life seemed to be cooling into some ice age of inactivity, lacking the friction of a dying marriage, lacking even the fragile sparrow-like warmth of her child. The child wasn't with her. He was staying with her parents while she waited to give birth to her second. So she had nothing to do, nothing at all, but to keep herself alive and to wait for the pangs of birth to begin. She didn't ring her parents to tell them that her husband had left her, because she preferred to be alone. She wandered round the cold, empty house, watching the rain fall outside, seeing the windows silted up with London grime, watching the dust thicken on the furniture. She did nothing. She had often, as a girl, imagined such a life, empty, solitary, neglected, cold. It seemed to have happened to her, perhaps as a result of those imaginings. Like a victim, she waited, meek like a sacrifice. From time to time it occurred to her that she ought to feel desolate, abandoned, frightened perhaps, but she seemed to lack the strength to feel these things. She felt nothing. She walked about and lay in bed and made herself cups of coffee, and sometimes waves of familiar dead emotion would softly suggest themselves to her, emotions such as loneliness and physical alarm and social fear. And somewhere else, far away, she heard those mighty abstractions crashing on a distant shore, treachery, love, despair. Meanwhile, as she waited, the emptiness was almost comfortable. She saw nobody, taking care to shop in shops where she wasn't known, staring blankly as she handed over a 10-shilling note and leaving money in an envelope for the milkman so that she could avoid his irregular, bespectacled two-wheel face. She held in fact so much to her solitude that, when the pains of labor started, She could hardly bring herself to summon the midwife, so reluctant was she to see and to be seen. She lay on her bed, thinking of a true story she had read once, many years ago, in a woman's magazine. A story of a pregnant woman stranded by some unmemorable and unimaginable stroke of fate in a hut in the snowy wastes of Alaska. The woman had lived there alone, and had produced her baby, and had survived, and had indeed lived to tell the story of her ordeal. This tale had always haunted her, and as she lay there and felt the ebb and flow of pain, she wondered if she had remembered so well because she was called upon to emulate such brave isolation. Although, of course, she didn't. Common sense prevailed, as she had always known it would, and after a while she got up and rang the midwife and then her cousin Lucy. So much contact after so much silence was exhausting. She lifted the baby's home confinement kit down from the top of the wardrobe and got out some newspapers and towels, and then lay down once more upon the bed, damp and breathless. By the time the midwife knocked, she was too far gone to get up to answer the door, so she called idly from where she lay. As she washed her face, she thought that it would be good the next day when she could have a bath. She remembered from the first child the pleasure of that first bath, and the warmth of the water on the damaged flesh, and the flat, magic belly, and the curious texture of the salt in the water. She didn't know why they told one to put salt in the water, but they did tell one, and religiously she did and would. It was healing, perhaps. All of her was for healing. Oh, never. Damaged from birth, beyond repair, damaged from birth, an inheritance of afflictions. She cleaned her teeth and combed out her hair. In hospital, after the birth of her first child, one of the nurses said to her idly, for the sake of killing silence, "I bet you are longing to get off to have your hair done." All the mothers say they long to get back into their hairdressers after they have been in here. And Jane had gazed back, smiling polite acquiescence, but amazed in her heart because she had never been to a hairdresser in her life, or not above 5 times since the age of 20. And she always believed the words of strangers with their strange authority, and had truly tried to imagine in an instant a hospital full of women pinning for the ministrations, and loving care of their coiffures as she herself pinned for the she knew what. Where she had failed, that she lacked such passions, she invited those women, simply desiring what could be simply had, and she pulled a comb through her long tangled hair and saw her grey face in a dusty mirror, a woman's face, despite all. This time the midwife had not shaved off her other hair, as they had done in hospital. Jane, unable to believe her good fortune, her release from this indignity, had asked her why not, though at a juncture too late for action, as the child's head burst beautifully out, and the midwife had mumbled that it was a waste of time doing such things. Lovely, lovely, Jane had screamed, and then the child had cried. She read for an hour or so, and he made her a cup of tea. Too strong this tea was, but she didn't complain, and drank it bravely and gratefully, though shuddering slightly at its bitterness. Then, as before, she fell asleep. But because this wasn't the first time, she fell asleep not carelessly, not as though carelessly detaching herself from him and the room, but gently accepting his presence, arranging herself upon the bed and the pillows in some way for him, and not against him, so that he would know, even as she slept, from the distribution of her arms, that she had been glad of his coming. When she woke later to feed the baby, he was still there in the dark. He watched her without speaking as she silently fed the child, and when he went to Laurie's bed, taking him with him to the nappies, he said, "You see, I knew I had a reason for staying up this time." In the morning, when he woke at the same instant, or so it seemed. He turned to her, about to clasp her, and then, recollecting instantly and gracefully the circumstances in which he lay, he checked himself. He arrested his movement, and reached out instead for her hand. It was as though she had seen his desire and his hesitation, the one the shadow of the other, both expressed in an instant, both inseparably linked. The unlikely, artificial quality of their proximity, the ways in which they knew and didn't know each other, seemed to her to possess a significance that she could hardly bear, such hesitant distance in a so small space, such length knowledge and such ignorance. When he spoke, all he said was as though stating a fact that had to be voiced gently before it could be believed. I slept all night in your bed. Did you like it? She asked him, rubbing her eyes, having herself up a little, propping herself up against the pillows. I would have died, he said. I would have died if you would told me that I had to go and sleep in that child's bed by myself. I wanted to be here so much. It can't be true, she said. It's absurd. It can't be true. Of course it's true, he said, lying there on his back, looking up at her, and she noticed that he was shaking slightly, trembling, unable to lie still. Touch me, he said. Go on, touch me. I dare not, she said, but she reached out a hand and touched his shoulder, inside the crumpled shirt, the burning, smooth flesh of his shoulder, and at her touch he winced and shook, and started to laugh. It's no good, she said, amused and yet slightly distraught. As though caught out, it's no good. There's nothing we can do about it. Nothing at all. He moaned politely in assent. She found it hard to look at him, startled by his supine reduction to accessible humanity, startled by the nearness of his hitherto so distantly and cautiously acknowledged beauty, alarmed as ever by the physical manifestations of her otherness, of man, alarmed most of all by his appeals to herself, as she lay there by him. She had so little expected ever to see him such a strange light. She had so little expected to hear him in such a way. Looking at him now, covertly, carefully, she wondered how she could have known him for so many years and never have reached out so much as a prophetic hand to touch him, just as to touch in passing. Nobody seemed to notice what a threat the presence of James was, what nonsense it made of the whole scene. I truly felt that if he were to rise violently to his feet, the whole room would collapse like paper. That if he were to speak, the gates of careful petals would shatter at the sound of his voice, like old dead flesh exposed to alien air. But he didn't rise. He did not speak. Carefully he sat there, gently, delicately silent. How did I know then that there was treachery in his heart, and that it matched my own? In Malcolm, whom I was to marry, there was no such treachery. He was subdued to that room, to its pastel shades and flocked wallpaper and magazine racks and light fittings, to its good taste and its observances. He didn't belong in it, but he hadn't the means to destroy it. The way that James held his cigarette was in itself a menace. I watched him cowardly, not yet aware what I was watching. He was only the stranger in the room, the only person there to whom my father's family references to the headmaster of Winchester and other dignitaries could betray me, and I thought I was waiting, as I had waited as a child, for those sickening signs of boredom and distaste, those judgments from equal ground, those perishings by the same word. But James did not judge. He nodded politely and knocked his ash mildly into the grey glass ashtray. Last time I saw you, my father was saying, he told me that this new system for admitting local children was simply an agreement for the sake of peace and quiet, and James shifted slightly the angle of his arm as it rested upon the chair. I felt my own arm, my elbow grating on the harsh weave. I should have known then. It was all foreordained in that slight transference. Drowning is not so pitiful as the attempt to rise. 3 times the said a sinking man comes up to the face the skies, and then declines forever to that abhorred abode, where hope and he part company, for he is grasped of God. The Maker's cordial visage, however good to see, is shunned, we must admit it, like an adversity, by Emily Dickinson.